Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started here on this session on pastoral transition, and we'll go ahead and get this thing up maybe a little bit more here for me. I've got a couple ladies in here who want to be pastors, who want to transition. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and I realize that probably the limited amount of people this really applies to, but the ones that are here, obviously, I think there's some good information. I still need to get this thing up a little bit further. I think. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, let's start with a word of prayer, all right? Father, thank you so much for the day. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to just be together today and just to learn and Lord, just kind of bump up against each other and learn some things and be a blessing. I pray, Father, that you'd help us for these next few moments as we talk about transition, pastoral transition, and all that's involved in it. And Lord, I ask that you'd meet every need in Christ's name. Amen. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 14, the Apostle Paul says, "But continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing whom thou hast learned them." Of course, Paul, again, in this particular passage, talking to this young man, Timothy. And then in the book of Titus, chapter 1, verse number 5, the Bible says, For this cause I left thee in Crete, that thou mayest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I have appointed thee. So one of the things that's pretty important is this idea of continuing, people coming behind us continuing. I think one of the tragic elements of our generation is that we can all think of churches that in the past were what we would call a marquee church, a church that was maybe, you would mention the name and everyone would know who it is, and then, because of a lack of proper transition, something happened, that church went another direction and doesn't exist. I'll give you a case in point. Our church was planted out of the Akron Baptist Temple. Akron Baptist Temple was started by Dallas Billington back in the 1940s, and of course grew into a mammoth church that was, planted so many churches across the face of the world, literally, but specifically in Ohio. There's like 450 independent Baptist churches in Ohio, and if you see the name Temple, most of them were planted out of the Akron Baptist Temple. So it was Canton Baptist Temple, Akron Baptist Temple, Lima Baptist Temple, Massillon Baptist Temple. These were all churches that were planted out of the Akron Baptist Temple. Well, Akron Baptist Temple doesn't exist anymore. The whole building, they just tore the whole building down. The last auditorium was built in 1985, a 3,500-seat auditorium. And the church got to a point where it just doesn't exist. They changed the name of it, changed the direction. The facilities were too much, and so they just kind of walked away. And so it became a place for vagrants. And so the city said, well, it's a nuisance, we're just tearing it down. And so they did. So it doesn't even exist. The church, the church doesn't exist. The facilities doesn't exist. So I can think of at least a half a dozen churches in my mind at one time when I was a kid growing up, and as a young preacher, you could have pointed to and said, these are great churches that people would know of, and they don't exist anymore. So why does that happen? Well, I think sometimes it happens because a church, one man comes and he's just larger than life. He's got a great big personality, and then the guy follows him. Maybe he doesn't, or whatever the case may be. Or sometimes it's just the church is primed. It's not primed and ready for the future. And so what we want to talk about today is how we prepare for transition, because we need to know at some point that churches are preparing for a future. And whether we like to think of it or not, I remember going in as a young preacher, and when back in the 1970s when I graduated from Bible college, nobody's going to retire because Jesus is coming, and so we don't prepare for it, we don't plan for it, we just we don't think it's going to happen. But here I am. I was a guy who transitioned into a pastorate, and I'm a guy who transitioned out of a pastorate. So I know both sides of this whole thing, and I know that it's vitally important that we prepare for it. So let me just give you a little bit of the story of our church so that you're a little bit aware of kind of what's happened there. So our church was started in 1958. A guy by the name of Roy Thompson came to Cleveland, Ohio, just to plant a church fresh out of Bible college. And so he planted the church, and God bless. Within 10 years, we had built a 1,500-seat auditorium. I had bus ministry, all kinds of things going on, and Point Christian School and those type of things. And so it was blessed. And so he pastored for 37 years. So he came in, planted the church and then stayed for 37 years. And then when I had come on staff, the church was 20 years old. So I had grown up there, been saved there, called to preach there, went off to Bible college, and then I came back there when I was like 20, 21 years of age after finishing Bible college. And he brought me in, and I thought I was only going to stay for a little while and I was going to go. And then at a point, it became clear that I wasn't, and he started talking to me about the fact that maybe I would be the guy to succeed him. So he did that when I was there about 5 years. When I was there for another 7 years. Another 7 years at the 12-year mark. He talked to the church, about the fact that he thought that I should be the successor. I talked to the men about it, and then the church voted on it, and they called me to be the co-pastor with the idea that upon his death or resignation, I'd become the next pastor. And we co-pastored for 5 years. So when I was there for a total 17 years, we transitioned. I became the pastor, and he became the pastor emeritus. So we went through that transition, and it was just a good transition. So that happened on September 3rd, 1995. I transitioned into the pastorate, and then on June the 2nd, 2019, I transitioned out of the pastorate and did the same thing with the guy who came behind me, which happens to be my son, who's the pastor there now. So we've had a church that's 66 years old. It's had 3 pastors. It's never known a Sunday without a pastor. And if there's a key to long-term longevity, that's it. That you don't leave a church without having someone coming in that's prepared to come behind you. So vitally important to be that way. So I think about the fact. By the way, you should have some notes there, and I'll start giving you some things. But I will tell you this, that the pastor that I followed had a plan of transition in his mind, and I'm just going to touch on these things very quickly. I don't know that these are in your notes, but by way of introduction, first of all, I think he prayed as a founding pastor. He prayed that God would give direction through the Holy Spirit so that he could prepare someone to be his successor. So I think part of what we have to do as people is we have to think, hey, at some point I'm stepping out. I need to start praying now. I don't wait till I'm so old where it's time to retire. Okay, Lord, bring me somebody. No, you need to be praying now that God will bring you someone that you can work with to prepare. I think, personally, I'm of the opinion, it's not always this case. I'm personally of the opinion, though, that I think the best transition is a transition from within. So you bring someone in, you train them from within. They know the culture of the church, they know the philosophy of the church, they know your heart, they know the heart of the people, so that when they step in to become the pastor, it's not a whole new philosophy, it's not a whole new idea, it's not a whole new personality. They already know that. So let me give you this information. So when I was called to be the next pastor of the church, again, I grew up there, worked on the staff for, at that point, 12 years, and before I became the pastor, it'd be 17 years, but I got a 98% call of a fairly significant congregation. So only 2% said we don't want him, 98% said we want him, okay? So then when it was time for us to do it again, my son had been with me at that point about 18 years working on the staff. November of 2016, the church called him to be the co-pastor with the idea of being succeeding pastor. I hold this over his head. He only got a 96% call, so I said, I got 2% than you, so they must love me more than they love you. I'm just kidding. But again, a very substantial call to be the next pastor. So, I don't know about you, but I would never want to take a church where, I got a 75% call. I just wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want a quarter of the church against me. I want a substantial amount of people saying, we're with you, we think this is good. But again, they know you. So again, you look at this situation where, okay, great if we can raise them up from the end. I will tell you that the pastor that I followed was a very selfless pastor. He realized that one day he would need to resign, and he needed to make sure that this church was ready for the guy that was coming behind him. So he started, as I said, started speaking to me when I'd only been there for 5 years, started saying, I've been praying for a while, God has sent me somebody, I think you may be the guy. No guarantee that that's going to happen, but you need to pray that maybe that's God's direction. And I got to tell you, when he told me that, there was no comprehension in my mind that was what's going to happen. That was the first thing that any clue that I ever had that I would ever be the pastor of that church. And even then I thought, of all the people in the world, I'd be the least likely person to succeed him. So again, here, I would say that part of what has to happen is that if you're gonna transition some point, and especially if you think there's somebody that you're working with already, that may be that person, or you're looking for that person, when that person shows up, you have to be selfless, and you need to begin to give that person some responsibility so that they can begin to kind of get their arms wrapped around the position of a pastor. When we say co-pastor, there's no such thing as really two people of equal power, right? I mean, you can't have a church that has two men who have equal power. I knew that when I became the co-pastor that I really was like a wife to a husband, you know. He would have the final say. I'm just there to help and to learn and to get ready for it. But that can't happen unless you have a man who's willing to put someone else in that position, or at least give them some position where he's going to be doing some preaching and some leadership. I think one of the greatest dearths that we have today is a lack of leaders that are ready to pastor churches. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that can only happen as men train people that are coming behind them. So, again, I would just simply say, how does a church successfully transition? How do we transition from one pastor to another? We've all heard the horror stories. My concern, because I had read some books, and, you know, obviously I think you can, and by the way, if you don't have this book on your bookshelf, I would encourage you to get it. It's called Next. It's a book on pastoral transition. I don't have the exact title, but just look for the book Next and then type in the word pastoral transition. And it was written by two Southern Baptist guys, and what they did was they went out and they kind of surveyed all the churches that had gone through transitions, the good, the bad, and the ugly, those that did it, those who didn't do it very well, those who did it very well, and they tell the stories, and then they just give you some very, very practical steps for transition. And I would say that if there's a book that every pastor needs to have on their bookshelf, then you have that pastor, because what the thought is that every pastor is an interim pastor. And that's a great thought, okay? Okay, I think this is my church. No, you're only here for a short time. If Jesus doesn't come, somebody else coming behind you. So you're an interim pastor, and you need to understand that you're getting that church ready. It's not your church, it's the Lord's church. You're just there to help them while you're there, and then prepare them for the next guy that's coming behind you. So how do we do this? Well, you should have some notes. Number one, there is no perfect church. I think we have to understand that there is no perfect church. You know, we'd like to think that the church we pastor is great. No, that's letter A. There are great churches, but there are no perfect churches. Letter A. There are great churches, but no perfect churches. So I believe that the church I pastor was a great church. It was a legendary church, but it was not a perfect church. So what we have to understand is that all churches have issues that are at play in them. Sometimes there are power struggles that are going on between people within the church. Sometimes it's that there are other things that are at play. Sometimes it's staff problems. Sometimes it's deacon problems. All problems are people problems, because all people are flawed sinners, right? So every issue that we deal with has to deal with someone who has some problems going on. But throughout the New Testament, we find churches. Each church has its strengths and its weaknesses. Every church, Corinth had its issues, right? Paul's writing to the church at Corinth and says, hey, you know, here are the issues. I'm going to address the problems. You're carnal. You're not strong like you think where you ought to be. I said you're babes. You got a moral problem. You got issues that come down to the issues of the flesh, and so he deals with those things. Philippi had relationship issues. I mean, when you read the book of Philippians, it was a wonderful church, a great church, but evidently there was some fussing going on within the church, because Paul talks about how to have peace and how to have harmony. And he rebukes really two ladies there in chapter 4. Says, hey, I sent ye, and I can't remember the other ladies' names, but anyway, those were two women's names, and he said, I want to be of one mind. So evidently there was some issues there at Philippi. And the 7 churches of Revelation, all of them had some issues that he was dealing with in regards, even if they weren't mentioned. So, I don't know about you, but sometimes you hear about churches and there are these great churches. I know they still publish the Sword of the Lord, and every once in a while they'll feature a church, And I've had those opportunities where I'm thinking, man, I can't wait to go visit this church and finally get there. And when I get there, I'm sorely disappointed because it seems like what was kind of touted as being this kind of great church, and you get there and there's a handful of people and they don't seem to be doing much, and and it's like it was a bunch of hype and it wasn't really all that exciting. And then there are other places that you get there and you're greatly impressed that they're doing so much more. And so I'm just simply saying every church has its issues, and you want to be a church that obviously is a great church, but understand this, that there's never going to be a perfect church, ever going to be a perfect church. We should work and strive to be a great church. It should work to strive to build a wonderful work for the Lord, but again, it'll never be perfect. Letter B, there will always be things that need to change or be strengthened in any church. There will always be things that need to be changed or strengthened in any church. So again, Paul made that statement to Titus in chapter 1, verse number 5, for this cause left thee in Crete, that thou should set in order the things that are wanting. I'm sure you're familiar with this, but that idea of setting in order is like setting a crooked limb. You break something, you have to set it in place in order for it to be made right. So when I became the pastor of Cleveland Baptist, there were things that I knew that I wanted to change when I became the pastor. So I'm going to just mention a few things. The pastor I followed was kind of an old school guy. Of course, every generation has its challenges, and there are things that you obviously have to deal with in those generations. So when my pastor came, he had obviously grown up during the World War II era and the Korean War era. And so, in that day and age, men were taught when authority speaks, you just do what you're told. Nobody asks any questions, right? So, hey, I say it, nobody asks any questions, just go do it. So the orders are given and people carry them out. Well, by the time I get to the point of becoming a pastor, everybody's asking all the questions. It's like, go do this. Why? You got to have some explanation. So, we had to kind of change some of the culture in some respects. The man I followed was a good man, a man of great moral integrity. I'd never met that I ever met as far as male leadership is concerned. But I could count on one hand in the 17 years I worked with him the number of deacons meetings he had. So in 17 years, I guarantee there weren't more than 5 that I worked with him that he called as a deacons meeting. And most of the time is when he needed to borrow money to build a building or whatever the case may be. So there just really were no deacons meetings. And I thought to myself, well, when I become the pastor, I would like to be a little more accountable to the men. And, I mean, obviously he started it, no issues as far as misusing funds or anything like that. Actually, probably the men would have probably taken better care of him than he took care of himself and the staff. But the point is he just got to the point he just didn't want to deal with it. So I thought to myself, well, that's a change that I need to make. And so when I became the pastor, I started having regular deacons meetings. And I said to the men when I met with them, I said, look, I'm not here to have you tell me what to do. I'm here to be accountable to you. I'm here for you to be the sounding board for things that I'm thinking. I want to get some feedback from you. But ultimately, it's my decision. I'm the pastor that God has called to lead this church. But I need accountability, and I need to obviously have a sounding board. So I just want to be more transparent. I just wanted to make sure that those things were taken care of. Financially, our ministry was struggling when I became the pastor. We had probably 40 years of just building after building after building, mortgage payment after mortgage payment after mortgage payment. And the last one we had built in 1990. That's when I was called to become the co-pastor. It took us 3 years to get it done because we basically did it in-house. And so by 1993, we moved into that building. It's a 40,000 square foot school building, all brick black construction, 2 stories of education, and then a full gymnasium. But it had to be paid for, and we had, again, had to roll it over. And then I knew that when we wanted to build it, I kind of pushed for it because I knew that we needed it, so I knew that I would be paying for it. So it wasn't like he went in debt with it and then dumped it on me. I knew that was happening, and it was really kind of part of my idea. So again, I just wanted to make sure that the finances were open and that everybody knew what was going on. So, I would just simply say that, I kind of inherited some weaknesses, some things that I thought needed to be strengthened. And this finances need to be strengthened. I'm not opposed to churches borrowing money. I think sometimes you have no choice. But I have to tell you, the debt should be very short-lived in most churches. Instead of just a constant battle to pay the bills, that's what I dealt with. I was paying like a $23,000 a month mortgage payment on a building, and it was just about killed me with everything else we had going on. But we finally got it paid for. So I would just simply say that finances are always an issue, and it was an issue for me. So I had to deal with that. So there are things that you deal with. So there'll always be things that need to change or be strengthened in any church. You may have a inherited church that really has no written policies. We really didn't have there wasn't really any type of employee manual. There were no job descriptions. And I think job descriptions have a place. But I think if you hire a guy, he needs to know what his responsibilities are. And so sometimes it's good to have some written policies in place. And so we had to do some of those type of things. And we had to deal with just some school issues. And so just a lot of things sometimes that need to be strengthened. They're not necessarily terrible, but they have to be strengthened or changed. And so you have to have that, all right? Number two, we must have a sense of wisdom in making changes in an established ministry. So if you're going to transition a church and you're a new guy coming in, you better have some wisdom on making those changes in established ministry. Now, if you're starting a church, you get to make whatever decisions you want to make as long as they're right decisions. But when it comes to established ministries, you got to be careful about that. You got to have wisdom. Now, letter A, some things can be changed immediately. So again, as I mentioned, I immediately started having deacons and meetings and staff meetings. We had no staff meetings, unless there was something that had to be dealt with. But I implemented regular meetings with the deacons, regular meetings with the staff. We also started publishing financial reports for our deacons to see. Before, no one really knew what was coming in. No one really knew what was going out. I mean, obviously, internally we did, but I'm talking about leadership that were outside of the staff. Nobody really knew about that. So we started publishing those financial reports. We started requiring some things from our deacons and the staff that, while the expectation was probably always there, no one really demanded it. But I felt like these were things that we needed to demand. Hey, look, if we have soul winning, you're expected to be at soul winning. If we're having a revival, unless you're sick, you're expected to be at these meetings. Not that people weren't, but sometimes you just have to say this is the expectation, and then hold people's feet to the fire. So I would say any glaring issue that's hanging out there needs to be addressed and should be addressed. If you're a new guy coming into a church and you don't have a history there with those people, you've got to allow yourself some time to get the confidence of people to start making changes, right? So let me give you a little story. We struggled for a while when it came to school administration, and so I had a guy who was an administrator, and he really messed up. In fact, he embezzled some money, and it was really a sad story, so I had to fire him, and then we just kind of had to cover that year, because we just didn't have any choice, and just internally, and I threw my son into that position as the administrator, and so he was like the associate pastor and the administrator of the school, and so he didn't want to continue on with that position very long, and I understood that it was just a lot of weight. So we started looking for an administrator. So I hired this guy, and he came with some great credentials, had a master's in school administration, and he had run like a small business, and his wife was really a top-notch teacher. So I had all these issues that were at play. And so when I hired the guy come in, I said, look, you don't have really a history here with these people in the school. The school is, at this point, is about maybe 35 to 40 years old. And I said, you understand, you're coming in, you're the new guy, so please do not make drastic changes this first year. Well, it just so happened that our church had sent my wife and I on a cruise to Alaska that took place in August, and we always have our in-service in August. And I'm just going to happen to be gone during this in-service, and I said to him before I left, look, do not mess this up. You're the new guy. You're coming in here. You got to learn these people. Do not make drastic. I mean, As soon as I left, I mean, he started that in-service telling these people how stupid they were and how bad this school was. And before the first day was over with, there were 3 or 4 teachers that were in tears in my son's office, turned in their resignation, say, we didn't want to work here anymore, you know. And it's like, I'm up in Ketchikan, Alaska, turn my phone on, and it's blowing up because, and so my vacation's over. I should have left my phone up. My vacation's over with because I'm realizing I got a mess on my hands when I get back. But that's because a guy went in and did something stupid before he got any equity to be able to, people to trust him, and he just started treating people like they were fools. Well, I got to tell you, pastors can do the same thing. That's why sometimes we have church splits, because guys don't get enough equity before they start making the changes that need to be made. And I'm not saying you tolerate immorality or ungodliness, but sometimes you see some things that say, you know, I'm going to change that, but I don't have enough equity. I don't have enough time here yet to have the confidence of these people to make these changes. That's why we need to pray for wisdom. God, give me the wisdom helping me to make these changes. So, you know, I had the luxury, because I'd been there for 17 years, to make some immediate decisions. Even though I hadn't been the pastor for 17 years, I still had the luxury. And by the way, even though I'd been there for 17 years, I'm still the new guy as the pastor. I am. I mean, I'm still am. But I think because I had been there long enough, they had known my life and they knew that I loved them. And so the changes that were being made out of love. So letter B, other changes take time. So sometimes things can be changed immediately. Other changes need to make time. We must understand that some things take time. You can't turn a church upside down because you think the things need to be done a certain way, even though they've been done another way for years. I like to use the illustration, the larger the church is like a boat, right? I mean, if your church is any size at all, it takes some time to turn a boat. You can't just whip it around, because if you do, you're gonna capsize it. So the idea here is that sometimes slow changes. So many churches, think of it, have been destroyed by men with big egos that it has to be done my way or the highway. And that just is not a good place to be for a church or for a pastor. So, sometimes following a long-term guy, a well-known preacher, sometimes, I've seen these guys, I've got to prove myself. I'm thinking of somebody, I won't use his name right now, but I listened to him speak at a conference, and he belittled the man he followed, to a sense that he made him sound like he was a moron and he was a fool. And everybody in the room would have knew who he followed. And I'm thinking to myself, why would you do that? The only reason you would do that is that you're insecure, and you think that you somehow have to make a name for yourself. But in doing so, you make yourself look like an idiot before these people. And I'm just simply saying that, we just have to be careful. It was said of W.A. Criswell, he followed George W. Truett. So can you imagine being the guy following George W. Truett? So Criswell, we know his name, but when he started following him, for years he was introduced as George W. Truett's successor, who took the pulpit of the great First Baptist Church of Dallas. Still, because of his willingness to have patience and establish himself, the day came when he was introduced as the pastor of First Baptist Church of Dallas. So what I'm saying is sometimes it just takes time for things to change. So there's a danger. There's a danger that as a staff member, you have a level of leadership inside and outside the church. But the moment you step into the pastorate, that leadership ramps up big time. And if you're not careful, it can go to your head. So here's a funny story. I used to go to these meetings, when I was the associate and even the co-pastor at Cleveland Baptist Church, and nobody cared whether Kevin Folger was there or not. I mean, honestly, nobody care less, even though, I was the co-pastor of the church, the associate pastor of the church, But the moment I became the pastor of Cleveland Baptist Church, I'd walk into these meetings and it's like everybody's running at me. It's like, well, dude, I was the same guy 3 weeks ago, but all of a sudden now I'm the pastor. Now you care? It's like, really? That's the way it is? But I'm just saying that, if we're not careful, those type of things go to our head. Oh, now I'm the pastor. I am the pastor of this particular church. And so we just have to be careful about that. When discussing changes that need time, we're not speaking of doctrine. We're speaking more of operational procedures, as policies, those type of things. So those are the things. So think about this. Again, when things are, if there's something that's really wrong, it needs to be dealt with immediately. Whenever we had an issue when it comes to sin, you cannot be slow in dealing with a sin issue, a moral issue in your church. And I honestly, guys, I wish, and ladies that are here, I wished I never had to deal with any of that stuff, but I've had to deal with more than I wanted to. But I have to tell you, it's like a snake, and you better cut its head off, and you better do it immediately, or it's going to filter down through the church, or you're going to be accused of sweeping stuff under the carpet, or just, and I'm just saying, you have to deal with some things very, very quickly and very, very harshly. Again, when it's a sinful issue, there's no room for, taking, let's just compromise on this. You can't do that. You cannot compromise on immorality. You cannot compromise on infidelity. You cannot compromise on fiscal irresponsibility. Those things have to be dealt with immediately. But other things, procedures, sometimes it just takes a little bit of time for that to happen. So, again, we say, number one, you must understand there are no perfect churches. You must have a sense of wisdom when making changes in an established ministry. Number three, you must make sure your motives are pure. You must make sure your motives are pure. So we say, letter A, this is not a task for a novice. So I would not suggest that most churches take a guy right out of Bible college to become a successor to an established church. I know guys coming out of Bible college think they have all the wisdom in the world because they've sat for 4 years in a classroom. But you know, and I know, because we've been in ministry long enough, that the college classroom doesn't prepare you half for what you're going to deal with in ministry. And so it takes some time to learn the nuances of how to deal with people and issues and problems. And so a guy coming out of a Bible college is, has to be very, very careful in what he... Now some guys have had established, maybe business owners and maybe been in the military, things like that, maybe a little bit more mature, but the average Bible college graduate isn't prepared for that. So my first pastorate was taking this established church, but I had worked, grown up in that church, and I had worked for the pastor, the founding pastor. He groomed me, prepared me to be a successor. And it was different. It was different from a position from somebody who just wants to make a name for themselves. So many a man would, when a church is open, would submit a resume, right? The bigger the church, the more resumes they get. Throw my name in the hat for that. And but the truth of the matter is that this is not really the position of taking an established church. It's not a position for someone who has a progressive mindset, who's wanting to take an established Baptist church and turn it into something other than that. I just feel like sometimes guys have these motives that are just not pure. So I'm coming into this church, and I know it's a hymn singing church, and I know it's it's traditional, it's worship, but my mindset is, I need to move this church to the left. I got to make it more progressive. We got to get rid of the hymns. We got to get rid of the piano. We got to paint everything dark. We got to make it more of a production. That's not a pure motive. So we've got to make sure that when we take things, or we're going to transition, that our motives are pure. Letter B, this is a task for a spiritually mature man of God. So this position is for someone who loves the Lord, understands the church belongs to him. As I mentioned, I was 17 years in working, preparing to become the pastor of this church. That last 5 years, I knew it was coming. I just didn't know exactly when it was coming. And then finally, a pastor announced, hey, here's when my transition's going to be. So, we made that a really big day. I prepared our church family to, really celebrate Brother Thompson's, legacy there as the pastor of the church. And we had a really, really great Sunday, and a lot of people came in. The place was packed, and of course we honored them and all those kind of things. And that night, we transitioned. I don't know what's going on, but I keep getting the same phone call over again to my phone. But so we that night I asked that I would be installed as the pastor. So even though I had been called to be the co-pastor, I wanted to have a formal installation service as the pastor of the church. And I don't know, all of a sudden during that night when it was all over with, and even though everything was great, the moment I became the pastor, I felt this heaviness, the weight of the responsibility. And it hit me that, hey, for 17 years I've sat in another office, and when there's a problem, hey, you need to go see the pastor about that. His office is right over there. I can walk you over there myself. I don't have an answer for that. Let's go see him. Then all of a sudden I realized, okay, that office is going to be empty. And all that's coming to me. I didn't care anything about the bills before, because I'm not the pastor. I don't have to worry about it. And all of a sudden, I'm thinking, okay, what did the financial secretary tell me? $10,000 a month for electric bill. That's a lot of money. $23,000 a month for a mortgage payment. That's a lot of money. And how much is our payroll? It's $50,000 a month. That's a lot of money. And I started worrying about all that stuff, and it started weighing upon me. And I'm just simply saying, a novice and somebody that's just young cannot handle that kind of thing. You have to be prepared. And even though I've been prepared, the weight of it was enormous. And so I think so often we don't think about that weight of the responsibility. And it's a huge responsibility. And that's why I think we need to obviously spend the time training. Letter C, the incoming and outgoing pastors must be godly men with a healthy sense of humility and meekness. Let me say that again. The incoming and outgoing pastors must be godly men with a healthy sense of humility and weakness. So I'm thinking when we either do the pastor-co-pastor relationship, it takes a man of humility to say, I'm going to step aside. See, when I got called to be the co-pastor of the church, it was 1990, June of 1990, and up to September of 1995, I'm co-pastor. So what he said to me, he said, okay, from this point on, now that the church has called you, we're going to rotate the pulpit. If I preach Sunday morning, you're preaching Sunday night, I'll preach Wednesday night. The next week, you'll preach Sunday morning, I'll preach Sunday night, you preach Wednesday night. So when you're a long-term pastor and you've pastored those people and all of a sudden now you're sharing that pulpit with somebody, that takes a man of humility to say, I'm getting ready to step back. I need to prepare somebody to step forward. So it takes both. And the truth of the matter is that, I was brought in to a lot of the decisions. I realized that I wasn't the final say, but anything that was going forward for the church as far as that would affect me in the ongoing ministry of the church, he basically said, okay, you make the decision. So again, here's a man who for 37 years pastored church, and all of a sudden now he's saying, okay, I'm going to step back. I'll take a step back because I know it's for the well-being of the church. So he was a man of humility and meekness. The same guy coming in has to be that, all right? So you have to do that. All right, then we said you must understand there's no perfect churches. You must have a sense of wisdom in making changes and establishment. And then you must make sure your motives are pure. Here's another one. Honor the long-serving pastor. Honor a long-serving pastor. The Bible says a man who serves well is worthy of double honor. And I think we sometimes miss that. Now, part of what happened in those early years of churches like our church, and I'm sure even churches like your church, was that nobody thought they were ever going to retire, so they didn't really plan for retirement. I know our pastor didn't plan for retirement, and even when I came on staff, he said to me, look, get out of Social Security, you're never going to use it. Now, again, I just did what I was told, because so in some respects, there was no preparation for even through Social Security for retirement. So I'm there, maybe 10 years, and I said to him, I know we don't think we're ever going to retire, but you know what? We're all getting older, and I'm seeing all these staff members that are retiring, and I'm thinking we haven't had any plan in place to help anybody do anything. So I said, maybe we should consider that. And so we sat down brought a financial guy in. He said, well, here's what you can do. And so what we did was that anybody who was with us for 3 years or more, from at whatever point they were, they got 5% of their salary. That was over and above their salary, was just put into a retirement program for them, and then they could add to it. But we didn't start that till late, and so when he went time to retire, he had no retirement. So here's what I would say. You honor him, letter A, while he's alive. So my pastor's been gone since 2010, but he resigned in 1995. So that's a 15-year period, and I'm disturbed really by so many churches that don't honor men who've been there for a long time. And so I realize that not every church is in a position. We really didn't have the money to take care of him, but I've sensed that we needed to, and so we gave him a monthly stipend of $2,000 a month, $1,000 every 2 weeks, twice a month, and took care of some insurances for him and things like that, and so we just did that. But I'm shocked about churches that transition from one pastor to the next, and when the guy who's been there for decades walks away and maybe comes back, he's not even acknowledged. There's not even a word, oh, it's good to see our founding pastor or the long-serving pastor back. No, it's like they're almost like they don't even want to acknowledge it. And that's just wrong. It's just wrong that we're not honoring people the way we should. So older men, they just, it's hurtful for them. I could use this illustration. My wife is here. Her long-serving pastor, she was part of Lyman Baptist Temple in Lyman, Ohio. And the guy who was pastor was Ronnie Cannon. And when he resigned, he'd probably been there, 40-some years, and he resigned. He walked away, and a new guy came in. He said he'd come back to the service, and they wouldn't even acknowledge that he was in the service. They never called him to the platform to pray, totally ignored him. And that's just wrong. It's just wrong that churches would do something like that to somebody. He'd take that church from 100 people and built a church to about 1,200 people. And not to acknowledge a man who God had greatly used in that community is just absolutely insane. And yet that's kind of, sometimes that's what happens in churches. So we gave our pastor a monthly retirement check to help him live. We kept him on with some insurances. So my pastor lived after his resignation, and every year I brought him in after he resigned. I brought him in, and I'd sit down and say, hey, look, this year I'd like you to preach this Sunday and this Sunday. So at least 2 Sundays every year I had him preach as the founding pastor of the church, just to keep him up. When he was out and he came back in, had been gone for a few weeks or a few months, he'd come back in because he was out holding meetings. I'd say, it's good to have our founding pastor with us. I want him to come up and close in prayer, that type of thing, just keeping him out in front of the people. I gave him an open door. I always told him he was welcome to come into my office and sit down and talk to me about anything. And I can only remember one time he ever came in to talk to me about something that was a little bit bothersome to him, and we talked it out. But I'm just simply saying, you need to honor a person while he's living. Then, letter B, you must honor him after death. You need to honor him after his death. When our pastor died, his wife continued to live, and I knew that there wasn't much of an income, so we continued on that same monthly stipend. She just passed away, a year or so ago? So we kept paying her since 2010. So that's about 20-some years, yeah. So, since 1995, all the way to 2023, I think she passed away in December 2023. So we kept a paycheck going there for her because we felt that was necessary. And so his wife did so. So you understand, again, they're just things that we ought to do that are right. Here's the final thing. There are things that need to be reinforced and strengthened in every church. So letter A, make a commitment to excellence. Make a commitment to excellence. I think our churches need to be places where, it's known as a well-ordered, I wouldn't say this machine, but it should be a well-ordered church. When people come in, they ought to know that, hey, the place is going to look good. The grounds look good, the buildings look good, and the staff is trained well. They know how to respond. The lay people, the deacons, the welcomers, they're all committed to excellence. They want the Lord to be glorified in His church. Letter B, a commitment to biblical preaching. We need to be committed to biblical preaching. Again, I don't know what that means to you, but to me that means, I try to be an expository preacher, and I preach through books of the Bible, but, you want people to know that your church is, when they come, they're going to hear a message from the Bible. We've got too many guys, and not so much in our movement, but in the realm of evangelicalism, who are giving little talks, motivational speeches, and not preaching the Word of God. The Word of God is what changes lives. Letter C, a commitment to separation and holy living. We need to be committed to that. We're going to be separated from the world. When people walk in, they don't think they're walking into a nightclub. They're walking into a church. We're going to preach about holy living for the Lord. And then finally, letter D, a commitment to soul winning and discipleship. Those things are still vitally important. Winning people to Christ and then discipling them to be followers and growing in the likeness of Jesus. Those are things that churches are supposed to be known for. We need to be committed to it. All right. We got just about maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I don't know if anybody has a specific question. I'd be happy to answer that. Again, this is kind of just a general type of overview on pastoral transition. But anybody have any specific question, I'd be glad to field that. Okay, good. You know it all.
There's so much.
Yeah, there is.
You know more specifically, really our realm.
Mm-hmm.
So you know that I took it from Pastor Bain.
Mm-hmm.
You know that he was very organized.
Yeah.
I mean, the man of organization.
Well, that's what he's doing now, right? He's still helping churches get organized.
And so he had a lot of things in place.
Uh-huh.
And Adam here, one of my deacons, he will know that we just decided that we weren't going to change much for a while.
Sure, smart, yeah.
And what is something else for the new guy that if you are honoring the previous man, if you have been slow to make major changes, what is something little that help you get past that infancy stage of you're the new guy to really moving into be the established pastor?
You know, in my opinion, I honestly think that a man has to probably pastor church for 5 years before it really owns it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time. It's still going to be always a comparison, and I don't necessarily think it's wrong to be compared to the person we followed. But at some point, you know, it's the guy I followed was legendary. So I mean, just big personality. You know, his name was known far and wide in independent Baptist circles. So when you follow a guy like that, it's like you're always kind of living in the shadow. But then, you know, after I had pastored the church for a while, so, you know, when I resigned after, you know, I was there 41 years. So I was 17 years as an associate, and then 24 years as a senior pastor. When I resigned, walked away. So there was a whole generation of people after he turned it over that never knew him as their pastor. They knew of him, but they didn't know him. But that doesn't happen until you stay long enough. So you have to obviously live long enough to the church transitions to the mindset, okay, there's enough new people here that didn't know the founding pastor. That's why you continually honor him to bring him up so that people are familiar with him, even though that he was never really their pastor. You want them to appreciate the fact that he set the stage for you. So I just simply say, I think you just have to continue just doing what you know is right to do. And, you know, at a point that churches will transition to your way of thinking, your way of philosophy. You're making those gradual changes that you feel like need to be made. And then finally, that's just kind of, it's just natural. It just happens. So, okay.
I've heard there is a moment with finances that it's like a market, like 2 to 3 years, and then maybe 2 to 3 years to like 6 or 7. There's a little bit of a slump. Maybe I've heard that, but I don't know. But I am seeing that a little bit at our place. And I'm wondering, is that common? Do you see that when you transition in?
Well, I'll tell you this. When I became the pastor, 1995, Cleveland was a church, a city on the downward decline.
Okay.
So, I mean, we were an industrial type of city, and a church that was built on, you know, that kind of thing, where it just, you know, it's like, it's auto, it's steel, and those things were beginning to dry up. So by the time the year 2000 came, I mean, there was just a radical shift. I mean, there was a time in our church when GM worked 7 days a week, 3 shifts, and you never went by there that there wasn't, I mean, just a full parking lot. Those guys were just churning. And same with Ford. Ford and Chevy, there was a Chevy plant, and then there was a Ford plant within maybe 3 miles of that one. And those both were just like that. So we had people in both. And then we had steel mills, and we had people working in the steel industry. So we had all those type of things. Now you go by those plants, and they're not working. They're working maybe 2 shifts and just it's like there's a handful of cars there because there's so much robotics and things like that. So we saw that real shift begin. And if you go, everybody Googles things, but go Google Cleveland, Ohio, and you'll see in 2000, 5 years into my pastorate, there's this just real downward shift of economics and a decrease of people in the area. When I was a kid growing up in Cleveland, there was 800,000 people lived in the city. There's now less than 400,000 people living in the city. And of course, the region is still a large region. 1.7 million people live in what we call the greater Cleveland area, but the city itself has shrunk. So we dealt with some real economic issues. And as I said, I was carrying the mortgage payment on this thing. And so in 2005, we got to a point where we just had to eliminate debt, and we went into an austere 3-year program of just getting rid of debt, and it was the 3 hardest years of my life. Almost killed me, literally. And honestly, we finally paid off the mortgage in March of 2009, and then we remodeled our auditorium, and I mean, it just went on from there to the point of paying that price. When I turned the church over, there was over $1 million in the bank. Church, it was going great guns. Our mission program had gone from $350,000 to about $650,000 a year. But you have to pay a price for some of that stuff, and you have to get through it. But to me, the key was getting the church out of debt, was eliminating the debt of the church. So yeah, okay. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Same pastor also pastored in Newport Beach?
No, that's Tomlin's son. Our pastor was Thompson, Roy Thompson. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Praise the Lord. Okay, thanks for coming.